Ofcom or anybody like that, you know what I mean?
Any of the offs.
Any of the offs. I'm just going to start with this, and then I'll kick into it. So we've got it. Hello, my name's John Costa. Welcome to the Documentary Media Centre. Today, it's day 6 of our 16 days of activism. For those of you who've not heard about it, it's an annual hashtag that happens from Friday the 25th of November, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it runs through to Saturday the 10th of December this year, which is Human Rights Day. So what we're trying to do is catch up with various members across the Parallel Lives Network, across the Global South, and obviously good friends and people that we know that are supporters of the Documentary Media Centre here in Leicester. And I've been joined by Professor Richard Hall. Rich, how are you?
I'm all right. Fair to middling, as my nan would have said.
Fair to middling, there you go. Can't argue with that. Getting a bit colder now, isn't it?
It's warm in here, though. It's the conversation, isn't it?
Well, it's absolutely warm us all up. So now listen, what I wanted to talk to you about is obviously you've got this book which has been out for a while now. So we'll talk a little bit about that, the Hopeless University. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about being hopeful as an act of activism. You know, I mean, kind of quite a radical thing there, as in like believing things could get better. Is it something that makes you almost anti-establishment or against the grain there, because rather than just putting up with it, you're starting to think a little bit about, you know, could things change? Could things be better? Are you I don't know, a domestic terrorist or a fundamentalist or an extremist because you think that there's a better way of doing it than capitalism? And I just think you're eminently qualified to have that conversation with, if that's all right.
Yeah, it's fine. It's very kind of you to say.
Fantastic. So just tell us a little bit about the book. How was just frame for people that have not heard about it or seen it, the Hopeless University. Why did you come up with that concept of doing the book that way?
I guess because I've been working in universities forever, in one form or another, a range of them. And I guess increasingly I've come to feel them. I've seen them, witnessed them, and acted within them. And I have very much felt them in an embodied way as being spaces that were devoid of hope, but also when I think back to my childhood, and occasionally my mum or my nan would say, they're hopeless, you know. There's nothing generative or productive or meaningful or authentic going to come from those spaces. And I guess at the time, because it came out in 21 and in 2018, I had published this book on the alienated academic, and that kind of took the lens really was looking at kind of the work that academics do. Trying to look at that because there's a whole we can't essentialize that. There's a whole range of things, but broadly, what's that work like, and how is that increasingly becoming devoid of any meaning for us, and very functional and transactional, and it isn't about relationships, it's about transactions. And then I wanted to look at the space. So increasingly, I was seeing those spaces in response to austerity, poverty, climate crisis, ocean acidification, and then very definitely the impacts of the pandemic, completely unable to respond in a way that was humane. They were being stripped out of any sense of humanity and what we might build together cooperatively for a better world, for another world. And all it was about value. How do you keep the show on the road? Economic value, exploitation, expropriation, extraction, all of that. So for me, there was a sort of a growing sense around that. It felt increasingly that these were institutions that were becoming, I think it's on the back cover, but more efficiently unsustainable. And they're unsustainable socially, but they're definitely unsustainable personally. And we see that now because we've got people out on strike, and a lot of them are out on strike not because of pay. They're out because their well-being is being damaged. They're out because of impossible workloads, you know. So for me, there was a sense of the book. It became very important to look at the idea of the university, because the university is seen as this kind of bastion of liberal possibility in the world. People want to go there, people want to study there. They're seen as part of kind of industrial and I guess kind of scientific approaches to policy that might generate knowledge transfer, spillover, any of those awful terms. I think increasingly I was kind of witnessing or feeling in myself a discomfort from being in those spaces because the relationships were so toxic and alienating and damaged and damaging. It was an ongoing process of it being damaging. So, you know, it felt hopeless in both those senses, that they are spaces that are hopeless for the task that we need them to fulfill, and at the same time they are devoid of hope.
Yeah. Okay, right. So let's leave that one hanging there. Yeah. Now we're going to go forward 4 days to Saturday. So this coming Saturday, somewhere in the UK or maybe elsewhere, we're talking specifically about the UK, there will be an open day at a university. Yeah. And there will be a young person there, the vast majority of them being young people, will be going in 4 days to somewhere that for them, they've seen the website, the brochure, they may have been to another open day where they were sold all of those things that university can be, the possibility, if you like.
Yeah.
Now, how do you identify with that person today if that was you 30 years ago going to university? I mean, I know the world's different, don't get me wrong, Thatcher and all kind of stuff. We got a whole conversation about, you know, the Tories back then as opposed to the Tories now. But so, you know, what do you think? Were you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and open to the possibilities of what university could do for you with your degree? And then that's been reinforced in some ways and then eroded in others? Or do you think the erosion is really in that last sort of push for management, middle management in the last sort of 10 years maybe?
Well, there was an when I went, there was an unquestioning logic to it. It was drilled into me by family. No one else had been to university. So there was a sense of this is your way out, very definitely, a sense of this is your way out. So you're going to do this. You know, we'd moved house, so my parents had taken on some impossible endowment mortgage in order that we were in the catchment area for the grammar school. You know, so there was a very clear narrative that this is the route you're going to take, and that's going to take you into university, and then whatever. Something will unfold at that point. There was never a kind of, but the logic was institutionalization to get to a point where you could be institutionalized in a job, you know what I mean? It would kind of elevate you. There'd be a mode of social mobility in that. So I still see that in some of those young people. And I know that if I think about myself at 18, very worldly wise in some ways from within the context of my family life, but having no kind of broader political literacy really around these issues. So when I've done it, I do open days. And one of the things that I'm missing today is teaching because I'm on strike. So I shouldn't even be talking to you about this job because, you know what I mean? This is research and I should not be doing this on a strike day, you know, but we could talk about the strike if you wanted to. I've got all sorts of issues with that. So there was, and that is the thing I'm missing today, is the contact with the young people in the classroom, because the young people I work with in the classroom, they understand a lot of this stuff, and they might disagree with it, and we've got some who push back, and you know, and they might not call me woke or whatever, but they push back about some of these issues. But they recognise the funneling for them, and they recognise testing and league tables and the commodification of the experience. Then, you know, they're pretty savvy around this stuff, and I'm with you know the beautiful and brilliant and much missed American sociologist Bell Hooks, who argued that the classroom is the last autonomous space, you know, and we have to defend it. And when I'm in those open days in 4 days' time or whenever it is, I think my next one's in February, but that will be what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what might your coming here accepting that it's fucked up in lots of ways.
Yeah, all that stuff that don't work.
Accepting all of that. Yeah. Who does it enable you to become? What processes does this kickstart for you in becoming and being and doing and knowing yourself in the world? Because there are other spaces in which that can happen, but if this person decides that the university space and the classroom space is the space that they wish to go into, then they deserve that I commit in whatever humane way I can to that. So I want to connect to them because it's relational, isn't it? You know what I mean? I don't want to see it as transactional, and I don't get that from those 50-minute hour seminars on a Wednesday morning.
So there's the sort of the connection or the disconnect, if you like, between the fact that you want to talk to your students in a way that you are a positive role model and, you know, someone that they can engage with. I always used to say to the students, because I've just finished teaching at DMU after 6 years, was the fact that, you know, I was more of a guide than a teacher. You know, I never saw myself as a teacher. You might give a lecture. You come into a lecture, and then this space is for a workshop or a seminar. But ultimately, you're a guide because you're challenging them to think about what the subject is, and then you're the guide that can tell them where they can find out more if they choose to engage. And again, some do and some don't, and the ones that do are the ones that get the better grade. So I remember talking to a lot of young people from London, you know, South London. I used to say, well, I'm from the East End, you're from South London. Yeah, so we'd have a bit of banter around that. But then we'd always connect about younger brothers and sisters that were left behind and worrying about them and sort of, you know, the economic challenges and the social issues and social justice issues and stuff. And so I always found that just by doing that, almost like learning the names of their brothers and sisters, you were able to take them on a journey where they didn't see you maybe for, you know, the colour of your skin or the colour of your hair and your age as their lecturer at uni, and got something more out of the workshops and seminars and lectures because you were talking about that. Because I always think about, I mean, I'm, you know, 56. I didn't go to university. I was the only one of my friends at the grammar stream of the comprehensive. So I was in the grammar stream of the first year of comprehensives in 1977. So our school had a lot of that kind of history and tradition. So in the stream that we were in, you were pushed, and everybody went to university, I think, apart from me and a few other people, but out of my friendship group. And when I think about, you know, university was a way out. You went west and you worked in the city because we were right on the boundary of the City of London, which is what I did, working for Pearl Assurance. Or you went the other way and you worked for the gas, whatever it was called then, I don't know, it weren't called British Gas, I don't think, BT. Or you went to Ford at Dagenham, you know. So there was some very clear paths that you were going to do, which really entrenched your socio-economic status in the community. So now university is still one of those things for those young people that I just spoke about, is still a way of getting further on. But there seems to be this will make you better, socially mobile, you can do all this. But is the reality that they go out and face, is it that is still true? Or has, you know, meritocracy and all those things gone and now we seem to be back into class war?
Well, I mean, I don't think we're into class war. I think we've permanently been in class war, and you know, meritocracy is used as a means really to justify, I guess, more eugenicist approaches to education. You know what I mean? You go to that school and you get those grades because, well, that's your background and your stock, innit? You know, and it's used as a bit of a screen, I think, sometimes for that. You know, and it enables us to ignore other intersectional, intercommunal, and intergenerational injustices, which are written, inscribed, scarred within or onto the kind of the skin or the fabric of society. I think part of the issue, I mean, I think it's interesting when you're talking about the potential routes through for you. When you were talking, I was thinking, well, one of the beautiful things for me is being in classrooms and being in supervision, say with PhD students. And I have the privilege of working with some Black and ethnically minoritized women who are reading for PhDs, and where their work is very autobiographical and identity related, and it definitely challenges my identity and my privilege as a white male professor. and that is really deeply uncomfortable and also liberating. And you have to be able to kind of sit with that and the discomfort of that in relation to what's being talked about and the ways in which it's being articulated. And I think, and the ways in which the relationships are fluid within that. But I think there is a sense for me that that our social understanding of the university is unclear. That we have an economic sense of what it might be, but it's that sort of social sense that then connects through to those pathways you were talking about. Is kind of unclear, and it's seen almost as a kind of a transit, a staging post, a kind of a transit point, you know, for individuals coming in. They'll collect it's seen as being a place where you collect a thing, a token, and then you move to the next kind of checkpoint via being able to pay down your debt, being able to pay your graduate tax, being able, whatever else it might be. And I think socially that space is very ill. It's deeply contested and it's ill-defined. I don't think we know what it is. What is it in community? What is it in the local communities in which it sits? What are its in terms of student accommodation in those communities? What are those deeper relationships? The relationship between student societies and that community, between vendors who are, because the university is never just a university, is it? It's like, you know, it's the university in partnership with that credit rating agency, those insurers in the bond market, those private providers, these educational technology vendors, these publishing houses that are all extracting rents from it. It's locked into these like associations of extraction and of capital, really. And within that, you've got 18-year-olds coming from South London, or they're coming from East Leicester, or they're coming from Corby, or Skegness, or wherever it is, you know, into this space, and then trying to find themselves, and they're trying to be, and then socially, well, what do we expect that to be, and what is it preparing people for, and is it preparing people for a really risky, really untenable and unsustainable future? Are we ever going to tell them that, or actually going to say, no, come here, do this,
because that's the path,
you know? And what are those pathways? It was perhaps clearer at the time for you, maybe, I don't know, for you and me. It feels a lot more for me now when I talk to school teachers about what their young people have to go through and that they work with have to go through, and how they have to work, and the stories that are told about them, work shy, dumbing down, exams are too easy, grade inflation, blah, blah, blah. All of that coming from people who, you know, the meritocracy and able to go read PPE, whatever, social capital enabled, financial capital enabled them to do that, you know, and well, it worked for me, you know. I just think that's the fact that they have to kind of push through that is amazing. And then they come to us, you know, and then they have to push through how we structure the place, and the place doesn't feel like it. I don't know. I think we're all socially unsure about what the space is, and emotionally unsure what the space is, and all of that. And yet we're all trying to find our way through it. And what are those pathways out the other side? Maybe we once knew what they were. Now I'm not sure. It's just a means of, you know, come in with your debt, go out, pay down your debt, prove to us that you are socially worthwhile. And this is just a transit point on the way, you know.
And do you think we're at a point in society where that feeling about the hopeless university, to use that title, is people are quite hopeless about a lot of things, you know, because of COVID and the sort of, you know, the former health secretary being, you know, in the jungle, and sort of, you know, people voting for him and not voting for him and stuff like that. It's almost now sort of wrongdoing, you know, whatever level that is, just seems to be the way it is. And do you feel that people are at the point where they think, well, things will never change? That's just how it is now?
When you were speaking, what I was thinking was, when I write this and when I write about this, because this year I've written a couple of things that have been chapters for other edited collections for books. That what I remember was a brilliant review, one of the best reviews I've had, that came back and said, I know this author's work. They said, it's normally quite, this is very dark. It said, like, is this, you know? And I was like, well, and it was about I've been doing quite a lot of reading around decolonial ecology in particular, and that kind of the ways in which decarbonising and decolonizing, you know, sort of, and those injustices kind of map across. And we might want to think about them in those kind of terms. And then what's the role of the university in addressing those then? You know, and I think part of it for me was a sense that those who work, not all, right? I don't wish to essentialise or generalise everybody. When I was writing about it, I was not writing about it in relation to former health secretaries who are now eating kangaroo gonads or whatever, you know, on the other side of the planet. I was not because it's that kind of, it's that, you know, case surveillant podos. They all must go to hell with them, you know. What I was more bothered about were those people who were inside universities and were writing about those spaces as if they could be reformed. And all they got was a reformist agenda that, to me, spoke of an idea of like and they got titles like the good university, these kinds of things. You know what I mean? So what's that then? And is that simply pointing back to? Is that pointing to back to a past that never existed, or only existed within a particular material and historical form that supported some and not others? And is in what sense is that fit for purpose in a world that's falling to pieces? You know, and I think we all recognise that part of the issue is to turn off IEV at 9 o'clock and not watch people berating each other over or berating former health secretaries because of the shameful fact that hundreds of thousands of people died in care homes. You know, like, well, I want to deconstruct we need to deconstruct why that happened and what that means about our humanity and our relationships, you know, and the ways in which we are reproducing a society inside which, when there's COVID-27 or whatever, or 29 or 33 or whatever, this will happen, but on worse terms, because the terms that we've come out of that last pandemic, and we're not out of it, are we? But where we are now is worse than, it feels worse than it did when we were clapping and banging pans, you know, sort of 12, 15 months ago. We have not reproduced this world in a generative way. We've reset almost in a way that is much more fragmented in terms of who we are and how we relate, in terms of the infrastructures that we have built or that we're willing to fund, that we've all of that kind of stuff, you know.
I was saying to someone the other day, it feels like a Black Friday, you know what I mean, or Cyber Monday, where they were saying that what you get now, there is nothing cheaper on Black Friday now. No. What happens is that it's at a price that you could have bought it before, but they've put the price up in order for it looks like you're getting a discount. And I remember thinking last Friday, that's how it feels now. This new normal. Everyone's saying, well, we get to the new normal, but the new normal seems to be worse than the old normal. Yeah. It's even more entrenched, and certain things are even more exposed as being fake or false or, you know, overly exploitive, as opposed to before when it was like they weren't, but now they seem to.
I think that there's something in this about sort of who we are, not as a fixed thing. And this is the same when I'm thinking about the institutions, plural, that we're in. They present as a fixed thing with an identity, rather than having a kind of a metabolism that is part of a bigger metabolism that we contribute energy into in whatever way, and that unfolds in particular ways. So I'm much more interested in that kind of active way of about knowing ourselves in the world and doing in the world and being in the world that is co-constructed, that is dialogic, that is deeply relational. At the moment, it feels like it's consumptive. It's about consumption. It's about the only thing we've got. We'll consume 9 o'clock ITV or the World Cup or whatever, you know, and we might get vexed about armbands, but we're not really going to do anything about it. You know, we're going to get vexed about it, you know, and we'll consume that, and we'll consume the issues around it. And that distracts us in part, I feel, because we feel like we feel like it's that Frederick Jameson thing of it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, and the particular form of capitalism that is unfolding in front of us is deeply authoritarian and destructive and and even more alienating and estranging. So it feels like all we've got is to watch that thing, you know, kangaroo gonads being eaten or kangaroo penis being eaten on I didn't watch it, but you know, or the World Cup or whatever your poison is.
Yeah.
And so for me, then I then take a step back and think, well, what does that mean in the context of the classroom situation? What does that mean in the context of that institution that I am working as a process in? And what am I reproducing when I'm working in that space? And it makes me, and so the subtitle of the book was intellectual work, because I don't want to predicate it on academics, because you're doing that intellectual work, you're here. You know, Tina's doing it, and she's here. And there are people doing it everywhere, and they're not in universities. It's about intellectual work. And how do we recover that then at the level of society rather than fetishizing it and saying, oh, no, that happens in a university, doesn't it? And there might be some partnerships with other non-governmental organizations or charities or whatever, but it happens there, doesn't it? You know. Well, does it? And if it does, what are the methodologies and practices and cultures and structures within those spaces? Who are they protecting? Who are they for? What's that for? Is that for value and value production, or is it for values and for valuing and doing something different? You know, so and then it's intellectual work, and then it's at the end of history. It's the idea that if we're sitting there watching the telly and feeling hopeless, well, we are, I think, or I am. That idea that, you know, there was this idea that we were at the end of history, capital had won, capitalism won, no alternative, all of that. The space for politics, the space for contestation and struggle was narrowed and narrowing. Well, for all sorts of reasons, it feels like, well, we look at China at the moment, for instance, range of other spaces. We look at Qatar at the moment with the World Cup. It feels like that space has opened up again, or has been, or never left, but has been revealed to us. There's a mirror been held up that sort of says, well, actually, you know, maybe we do have agency. To come to your point about hope, maybe we do have agency. What's that going to look like then? And be aware that we can't all act and have agency in the same space in the same way. Some of us have got to dig graves, and some of us have got to mourn, and some of us have got to keep ledgers and report it and document it. That's why this place is important. You've got to document it. While some people are going to be on the streets and they're going to be fighting fascists, or they're going to be on the streets and they're going to be protesting, or they're going to be gluing their hands to the M25, which I have no problem with, by the way. So there's all of that. There's all of that going. There's all that, and we do different roles, don't we, socially, and we have to accept that socially we have that, because we've been told we ain't got no agency, including from within the university. The only agency you have is to pay down your debts. Get the job that enables you to pay down your debts so you don't have to come to society other than maybe for a bit of pension, but you don't have to come to society for any social goods because they're being dismantled. So part of it for me is we sit with that hopelessness and we have to unpack it, and we have to see that we can do this work at the level of society, not just from within the university, and that this is not just to reproduce an alienating, exploitative, expropriating, and extractive system of global capitalist reproduction. It might be for something, there might be a deeper politics that's back on the table, and we have to join that. We have to think about that and join that back up to kind of who we are. I don't think I've answered a single question you've asked me today, you know. I think I've just rambled.
That's good. That's why you're here. It's great. That's why I invited you. I knew you'd be happy to talk.
Rambling Man.
So this is my the Rambling. That's the new podcast, the Rambling Man. Now, I was when I was inviting people to participate in this 16 days of activism, the universal question that I got asked back when I was saying to them, "Can I talk to you about this or this and that?" So I don't see myself as an activist. Okay, this is what people were saying. So I said, "Well, what does activism mean to you?" And so it was like, you know, radical, kind of doing things that maybe were extreme, yeah, like maybe gluing your hands to the M25, or, you know, attacking artwork or whatever it is. And I just said to them, well, from my perspective, it's about trying to change what activism is into just doing something. And that's really what made me think about speaking to you, because just to think about popular culture for a moment, because you spoke about the jungle and, you know, the kangaroo gonads and all that kind of stuff, was the fact that in Rogue One, the Star Wars film, which people may have watched or go off and watch, it's interesting, is they say about, you expect us to do this based on hope. And she said, but you know, all rebellions are built on hope. And suddenly to be radical, you know, to be an activist, to be any of those things, an extremist, meant actually just believing that things could be better. There was a better way, and that you'd not got to the end of history by believing that capitalism had won, but there were other ways of doing it. So for me, it was always very much about talking to people that were just doing things to improve. I always say, you know, whatever did with Citizens I or we do here is about improving the status quo. So you bring change about by you actually improving the status quo for an individual. It's not about big extremes about, you know, moving up ladders or, you know, changing jobs. Sometimes it's just about, can you make things better for yourself by what you're doing? So do you feel that just purely being hopeful is an extremist act, or, you know, being an activist is by thinking that it could be different? Because what you're talking about there is not improving the university from within. You know, what you're saying is the university just doesn't work in its current structure, so we need to start again.
There's some people have done brilliant and beautiful work. Think about people like Anna Dinnerstein at that. Have done beautiful work on critical hope and the politics of hope, and hope as a generative and productive and process that is about individual and communal self-actualization. So we can become, there's a process of becoming that is generative and positive and productive for us within that space, and it's political and it is situated historically and materially. It's about reflection. And I don't want the fact that I, you know, wrote this book on the Hopeless University either to see that I was denigrating that work at all. My take on that situation was that without going to the, it's like being in therapy, in it, without going to the very depths and unpacking yourself and really going to the dark place,
the root cause, yeah.
Without going to the dark place and sitting with the darkness, the hopelessness, and mourning it and grieving it, and then hospicing it and deciding how you let it die. And you carry it with you. It doesn't completely die, right? It's like those that we've lost, who we take them with us, the good and the bad, and their eldership guides us. And I think I deliberately use the words hospicing and eldership because I'm very taken with the work of the gesturing towards decolonial futures collective out of Canada, but also other Indigenous kind of feminist, critical feminist communities. Not that I want to colonize or extract from whatever lessons they've got, but there are some practices that I read about or listen to that make me stop and think about myself. Not that I can take the model and implement the model, but that they change me in some way through that. And I see that as a way of processing or deciding what to hospice from the space that we're in, and then collectively through a dialogue, well, where are we going to move now then? Well, if that's a collective and dialogic sense of moving, again, as a process that we do together, and we might disagree and all of that, but there's a number of us can decide to move, that's quite a courageous thing, right? It's also quite a faithful thing. It's courageous in that we want to see ourselves in particular ways that aren't represented inside the institutions and the practices and the cultures that we're currently in. So there's an act of courage there to say, no, I'm not doing that. This is the activist thing. I'm not doing that thing. That might be that the activist thing isn't going out and gluing yourself to anywhere. It's just making a decision that actually your personal or social integrity is better dealt with by modeling different behaviors. So there's a thing about courage. There's a thing about faith in yourself to kind of exist in the world without all this external kind of reference point and people kind of giving you, oh, aren't you amazing? You've won that award, you've written that book, you've done whatever. you know, your student satisfaction scores are up by a
Your
point,
NSF
or whatever.
points.
All of that, right? You don't need that because you've got more of a faith in yourself. So that kind of courage and faith, and then we can begin to think about justice. If we can begin to think about justice, there's a space for thinking about hope, and then we can potentially move towards peace. But you can't just have hope for me, I can't just have hope at the start. There's a dismantling and a grieving and a hospicing and a collectivizing of a sense that how are we moving now, and for what purposes are we moving? And that is not to say I can define a utopia, but I don't like, but this society we're reproducing that is capitalistic is a dystopia. For most people, it's increasing, and not only people, for the whole biosphere, but for our other ecosystems, it is so degenerative, toxic, hateful, poisonous, unlivable, that I don't want that dystopia. I don't want to be part of reproducing that dystopia as much as I can. How are we going to move then forward in a way that is focused on justice? And that, if we've got that as our focus, then we can think about hope. And I think that therefore there are stories that speak to us, that come from those who have been made marginal, feminist, queer, ecological, intersectional, intergenerational struggles that we can, and their stories matter and shape us and shake us, you know. I mean, is it Malcolm Ferdinand who wrote Decolonial Ecology? And he writes, the start of each chapter is about, and it's that kind of, it's a sort of the coloniality and the environmental degradations that are mapped into the kind of the history of slavery between, I guess, kind of West Africa and the Caribbean. He starts every chapter with by recounting or writing the history of a ship that took slaves, and the ways in which he has written those are, I don't know, shake me to the core in terms of, you know, and he's helping me bear witness to what happened, and therefore what I have to be to try to act with more integrity in the world now, and question whether that is possible within the structures, the university structures in which I work, you know, and how can I bring that? How can I be? He's asked me to be courageous. Can I be courageous in those spaces, in the conversations that I have? And I think that's really important then to think about what activism means in that moment, because it doesn't necessarily mean gluing your hands, or it doesn't necessarily mean confronting the police. It doesn't necessarily mean being kettled. It might mean those things, but one of the things that I take from with two people, that there's a brilliant guy called Dare Jamil, who you'll probably know of, used to write for Truth Out, and a lot of work on Iraq and the war, and then on ecological breakdown and crisis. And he has a very strong argument about we don't all do everything. We don't all do the one thing. It's a communal effort. Some people will be on the front line. Some people will be providing medical support on the front line. Some people will be doing the technology. Some people will be doing the back end stuff. Some people will be the chronicler or the chronicling of this. Some people will be burying the dead and grieving for them and telling stories about them. You know, so we work that through, and that each of those are moments of activism.
Which is what community is, isn't it?
Community, yeah, exactly.
Everybody has a role to play within that community.
And that's the same. And there's a brilliant woman, American former psychoanalyst, Martha Crawford, at Shrink Thinks online, who talks about it similarly. You know what I mean? How do we hold each other through this? So that's the moment of activism, right? So yeah, hope can be seen to be an extremist position, or if you are hopeful, you can be seen or painted as the village idiot, or you can be painted as the court jester. Oh yeah, you know, you say we're not hopeful, but look, we're letting these people do these things over here, you know. But I think to hold it, but not uncritically. You've got to work through why you're hopeful. Hopeful in relation to what? Are you hopeful in that you think this can be a good university? Or are you hopeful in that you think we can reform the university, make it less racist, have a better EDI policy or whatever? Or are you hopeful because you've worked through that, no, that's got to be abolished. We have to abolish that. Yeah. You know, it's got to go. because in its current form, it's locked into a whole series of structures and ways of building the world that are unhealthy for everybody. And then the next question is, how do we abolish it?
Yeah, because people say to me, oh, you know, which one should I be? I go, anyone. You know, and it's not about which one's better. Is it better to glue your hands to the M25? Is it better to think this is it and just watch?
And I think
it's about just doing something. It doesn't matter what you do. It's the fact you do something.
Yeah.
And also I think challenge yourself. You know, sometimes it's an activist act to challenge yourself. I was doing an interview with someone who was trans the other day, and you know, and I just said, look, you know, this is a two-way thing. You can't be an ally, yeah, to anybody without meeting someone from that community and turning around and saying, you know, what are the challenges you face? You know what I mean? What is it that we do or people like me do that doesn't help? And of course, what really came up was the kind of classic thing that social media feeds into, isn't it? And you know, Twitter and I guess Facebook are very good at it, which is, you know, an ally is not someone who goes out and buys a badge and wears a badge and stuff like that, because does it mean you're going to turn up? You know what I mean? You're wearing your thing, but are you going to turn up when you need to be turning up? And this is where we were talking about trans activism being based on, you know, a comedian like Dave Chappelle's view of it or J.K. Rowling. Well, you know, they're probably both right, and then they might both be wrong. But somewhere in the middle, I'm not hearing anybody who's trans having a comment about that. You know, all I'm hearing is these two polarized positions. So for me, it's very much around what we try to do here at the Dot Media Centre, particularly with the Parallel Lives Network, because it focuses on the global South countries. People come in and they go, oh, that's great. You've got all of that about Latin America and all Africa and stuff like that. Yeah. So what have you got from, you know, America and Europe and, you know, Australia and, you know, Canada and UK? And I said, well, I don't need to have any of that content. Why? Because if I'm going to put these people's perspective first, yeah, then they'll tell you about what your country did or what your country was like and who was supportive and who wasn't, because the whole colonial system has then led to not only capitalism, but also our approach of international development and how we apparently help these people to do things. So you don't need to collect the whole world's documentary media if you focus on the people that actually are the ones that are exploited throughout that system that we have, which is that extraction from Latin America to the North America and the extraction from Africa to Europe. Then you're going to get what those people did anyway, but at least it's their voice that's telling you what the impact was of extracting.
I think as well within that, there is what was triggered for me when you were speaking was also about the ability that the skills and knowledge and capabilities that are knowledges and capabilities or ways of knowing, let's say, the ways of knowing that are contained at the moment within universities, those disciplinary processes, there's an extent to which they enable us to understand or hear lived experiences in a very rich and deep way. And I would want those brought into conversation, because I wouldn't want this to come across as rubbishing those who spend their lives inside institutions, but also outside of them, asking themselves, how do I show up for people? And how do I show up for people? And why do I show up for people? For whom am I showing up? And for whom am I bringing my privilege into play? And there are a lot of people who are not doing that. There are a lot of people who are doing that. And I think that there's an ability within those institutions to liberate a lot of that potential to help people to understand their own lived experiences and to bring them into conversation with those from diaspora communities, of queer communities, of Latin American communities, Somali communities, wherever, you know, and bring them in to play in order that you understand yourself inside this world and inside a set of systems and institutions and structures and cultures and practices that are failing. And that's the crucial thing. And for me, part of the issue is there's so much potential energy and potentiality within institutions like universities, but they are governed, as you say, by coloniality. And I think that the logics of coloniality, that whilst we may claim that we are not colonial institutions and we are not in colonial societies, those logics of exploitation, expropriation, extraction are still alive, and they flow through our institutions. Well, some mode of reflecting upon that and bringing our skills and ways of knowing the world into play in other ways is one of the steps that I think that we need to take. Whether that's possible inside our institutions, I don't know. But I do think that it is interesting that, when you're talking about what the centre represents and what it's also what it enables, isn't it? Who is it working for? And who do you need it to work for? And who needs to feel that this is a space inside which they might be heard, or that they might be able to represent themselves, or where we might see it as a pedagogical space, And so I would want to come to this space as an activist space inside which I could bring my preconceptions and my whatever skills I've got, or whatever ways of thinking about the world that I've got, and my commitment and my courage. My courage gets tested in this space, and my faith to a human or communal project or a social project gets tested in this space, with again pointing towards justice. So we might get that by thinking about Europe and America and whatever, but I would get it by thinking about what are the intersectional, intercommunal, intergenerational injustices that operate within those spaces, in wherever it is, care homes, whatever, that we might learn about in this space. And those stories, those narratives that might kind of come through, that we might then look to connect with, in order to challenge how we're fixed. This world that we makes us fixed, tries to fix us, in time and space as things, and commodify us as things. And part of it is trying to dissolve that, isn't it?
And finally, when we talk about structures, whether it's a university or anything, even the UN, I think we could have a completely separate conversation about people's view, particularly from the global south, of the UN and what it stands for and what it represents. And there was a great thing I shared the other day from someone I'm interviewing next week from Perspective South, talking about, anyone who's from the global south, any of those countries, they've all been Qatar. As in like the media's approach to it as well. But inside all of those things is the fact that it all comes down to people. There's now 8 billion of us. all 8 billion to come through the door, but we're trying to do our best to make up to. But I think most of the time, the vast majority of people that come to the space, the centre, to find out about the Dot Media Centre or Parallel Lives Network, the first thing you've got to do is convince them that they've already got equity to contribute. They come here for either an answer, they come to find out what they can do, but it's always about what do I need to do. So most of the time you're going right back to, well, what do you already do? Yeah. And so what happens is, I would say some of the people that make the most contribution to this space are the ones that are already doing things, but it's never been sold to them, or they've never realised, because they've never had a conversation with anybody, that what they actually do is what you should be doing as an activist. So most of the time, the look on their face when they realise that this is a space they can fit in, because they've already got equity in the conversation.
Yeah.
So it's then about what more could you do, or what could you help us to do to help other people get involved in this newsroom, help organise this event, make sure that there's a Q&A at this documentary. So people are really important, and I think society's done a great job of saying people are either they're a commodity, they're a value travelling through a course, or what they're going to pay back, or what you can borrow, or a mortgage, which is a complete artificial construct from a bank to turn around and say, well, actually, how are we going to get you to borrow money? Well, why don't we put a value in something that's got 4 walls that you will then think is something that you need to have in order to get. So when you look at it from that perspective, people inside universities, we spoke about people coming to open days and stuff, but what kind of feedback have you had? So we'll finish on your book. What kind of feedback have you had from, there's people that have given you reviews, and people that are researchers in their own right and stuff, but what have colleagues come up to you and tapped you on the shoulder and said, or emailed you and said, look, I can't say this publicly, but this is what I think. Are you speaking for the silent majority, would you say, with that? People that think that it's a broken system and it can't be fixed?
Has anyone read it? I think the interesting thing for me is, like, somebody asked me, a mate asked me, why did you write it? Who are you writing that for then? And he didn't like the answer because I said me. Because it's like it's inside me, so I had to get it out on the page, you know what I mean?
And that's what all authors do. Yeah. They write books that are for them. It's like musicians when they say, I don't make music for you, I make music for me. You just happen to come along and listen to it.
So does it speak for, I wouldn't want to make any claims about who it speaks for. I think, I mean, it was very interesting to me the other week when Mayfly, who are the publishers, who are beautiful and brilliant and they've got a back catalogue that's amazing, and it's free, you know, it's open, so you can download the book for free, but we would also, you know, give a quid, covers, you know, there's a lot of free labor in that space to, you know, to edit and to proofread and to do the design work and all that. But they tweeted about it, you know, their Twitter feed I think had been dormant for a bit, and then they tweeted about it, and like, you know, so and then you know, every now and then I'm looking at half time in a football or whatever, and there's all these likes, you know. So there's something to me about the fact that it's whatever it's reason, resonating with something. There's a resonance there, whatever that resonance is, and people might not connect with the kind of the anti-capitalist, Marxist, humanist kind of space that it theoretically comes from. And certainly when I think about the fact that we're now into the third day of strike action, and there's been such a, and we do see quite a lot of literature about quitting or about ill health within the or about alienation within the space,
and also I think the collective nature of strike action now across all of those different, you know, people that have not striked before or for a long time also now seem to be getting into.
And the number of people as well who are saying, well, I am on strike, but I'm having a bath and I'm catching up on some sleep because I'm exhausted as well, you know. So and I would never want to speak ill of those people. I think that there's potentially something in it. There's a lot of people who would say, nah, that's not the case, you know, and that we can reform this space, or that the only game in town is more of the same. And I think that then brings us back to kind of the nature of the space. So when you're talking about this space is important for those people who come through the door because they can have a cup of tea and because they have a voice and because the space feels warm and welcoming and safe, right? And they feel like there's a material history, a culture, a set of values in the space that enable them to be, to sit, to be, you know, to be still or to not be still, however they need to be, right? Now the problem with the university is management within the university, where the university is structured, is set up to prioritize a fetishized view of the student as a carrier of £9,250 and student outcomes against which you're going to get judged in 6, 9, 12 months' time or whatever, and they're going to contribute to league tables and all of that. So there's a fetishized view of the student, or it's about the institution. It's never about the relationships. This space will be about humanity, right? It'll be about the space, but it'll be about the humanity and the values and the relationships and the relationality within the space. The logics of these other spaces are not about that. They might make claims to be being about that, but they aren't about that. They're about commodification, value production, the structural and financial and cultural and intellectual integrity of the space and risk management of that, which gives no space for trial and error, for fuck-ups, for breakdowns, for caring responsibilities, for ill health, for meaningful, authentic joy that is beyond the appearance of it, but is the actual essence of it, because there's a connection and a sense that we can improve materially in the long term these existences. So the spaces operate in such different ways, and they're really important. And I think that is part of the resonance of action, not just within universities, but in schools, for railway workers, for postal workers, for nurses. I mean, fuck me, demonizing nurses. That's my head. Nurses fucking sat with my mum and my dad whilst they were dying, you know what I mean? And they get demonized. These people, they've got to go, you know. Does my head in. But but the ways in which those spaces are recalibrated, and the toxic ways in which they're recalibrated in order to protect the sanctity of the space and a fetishized notion of the consumer of the space, as opposed to enabling meaningful, authentic, transformational relationships that are messy and fucked up and complicated and painful and real, and might enable us to engage with emergencies, something we have to resist in whatever way we can.
To be continued.
To be continued.